One of your other things is the idea that religions are uniquely responsible for violence in the world. Many of my friends are atheists or agnostics, and I often hear this trope. The whole new atheist movement really was triggered by this. The 9/11 attacks gave a publishing opportunity to people like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens. In fact, they got book deals because, here was this terrorist attack by Muslim fundamentalists on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and so on. And religion caused violence, and therefore atheism was the way to more peaceful humanity. I've heard that argument many times, but of course, as you point out yourself, and if we actually look at the history of the 20th century, the most violent century in terms of mass deaths ever, the deaths caused by communism in the Soviet Union, Stalin, the League of the Militant Godless, the persecution of Christians, millions. How many? 20 million. The Nazis, which were anti-Christian movement, nationalist movement, Pol Pot in Cambodia, Mao Zedong in China. Inconceivably large numbers of people, whereas the total number of people executed by the Inquisition, I looked it up just for comparison, was over its 400-year history or something. It was about 5,000. And we're talking maybe 100 million victims of secular ideologies, all of which claim to be based on science and reason. Communism, after all, was supposedly a scientific theory.
Absolutely. And Nazis as well. The whole show was also a very industrialized, scientifically underpinned process. Nowadays, we say it's pseudoscience and so on, but as you perfectly well know, the whole scientific world was completely convinced of racial theories, of racial hierarchies, and for hundreds of years had tried to catalog everybody into races. It was the eventual result of science. You can't say it any other way.
Yes, exactly. And eugenics was very popular among intellectuals on the left and the right in the 1930s. And the Nazis were all in favor of industry, technology, autobahns, Volkswagen cars, rockets, and so forth. So this was not a anti-scientific, it was pro-scientific. And indeed, one could argue that these are the natural outcome of the Enlightenment, that the Enlightenment, which gives this cult of science and reason and also empowering states, as you were saying earlier, when it goes to these extremes, is murderous.
Absolutely. So, but again, it has to be fused with a certain worldview as well, and that part is often forgotten. Also on the atheist side, where lots of the worldview is, let's say the identitarian worldview is very much linked to nationalism. And I bring in nationalism because if you look at the history of the 20th century, the biggest murderous idea wasn't indeed religion, it was nationalism. That's beyond question, because of 2 world wars being driven by nationalist ideologies. And that brings in a nice historic link, because we tend to think of the example of the violence of religion is the Protestants versus the Catholics, what we call the religious wars of the 16th century and so on. But in fact, what actually happened wasn't that, apart from how you interpret those wars, the end result, people think, well, nation states arise, and then those wars are quenched, and the nation state nowadays keeps a check on those religions so they don't start fighting again. And so we're more peaceful now. Okay, so 2 world wars further, we know that's not the case. But what you see is, of course it's not the case. Because the whole point is not that religion as such creates the violence, but the question remains, who has the monopoly on violence? Yes, it's true. In Western Europe, in the Middle Ages, the monopoly kind of resided in the church. If the Pope or the bishops or whomever weren't agreeing with a certain war or a certain conflict, then they could kind of put a stop to it. So they had a monopoly of violence. They could also decide when violence was appropriate. But nowadays, it just lies with the state. So what happened was the monopoly of violence from the church went over to the monopoly of violence of the state. So that's where you have to look. Who has the monopoly of violence? There's nothing bizarre there. It's not religion as a causality or something. It's just religion within a context of having monopoly of violence. Yeah, then yes. But so it's the same for nationalism. In another way put, for me, I also often use the term, it's not the fact that you believe in God that makes you violent, it's the fact that you think that you yourself are God. If Christianity, at the moment that bishops and popes think that they know what God wants and God wants for them to thrive over the world and kill everybody who doesn't believe in them, then of course it becomes extremely violent. But that's the same for nationalism. If you think that you know what is best for the rest of the world and for the subjects, or let's say even in democracy it exists, if the Americans think that they know what democracy looks like, so they can go and bomb 20 countries into democracy, then it's all fine. We're bringing democracy, we're fine. Basically, that's playing God over other people. So for me, it's not the belief in God which is a problem, but placing yourself in God's place.